Yeah, so for this game, Corey had a very specific vision that he kind of implanted on everybody in the studio by giving us a book that kind of detailed the narrative direction and the direction for Kratos and Norse mythology and all of that. Right away, it was like, okay, we got to figure out a way to make this little kid that was never part of Kratos' story or Kratos' life or any of the games a big part of this game in gameplay and combat. So that was like the initial kind of shock. And the second thing was just, of course, we're changing Kratos' weapon. He had probably one of the more iconic weapons out there, but he knows what his weapons used to be. And then now, there was all this concept art with him with this axe. At first, I'm not gonna lie, like the running joke in the studio was he had this like Home Depot axe that he was just hacking everybody with, because its first conception, like the axe didn't have anything very special about it. So it took a while for us to do the first prototype where we actually had him throwing it. As we were concepting the game, we had a lot of animation previs, we call it, where people, animators would go in there and give examples of what Kratos could be doing, and so they would show him like swinging the axe in different ways. Sometimes they would throw it, but every time they would throw it, it'd be like, well, how would he get it back? He's not just gonna throw his axe away, So eventually one of our designers came up with like the idea of like, well, what if we just let him recall the axe similar to how Thor recalls his hammer? It's a very Norse thing. So we put that in the game, and when we did, it immediately resonated, I think, with everybody that saw it. The core direction of this game was a very grounded approach, so that's why the axe was very basic, and almost everything Kratos was doing was very basic. So right when we started introducing that mythology of like the axe having this magical element of recalling and throwing it out and stuff like that, it started to cascade into other decisions of like, oh, what if the enemy started doing this thing, and what if we did this and did that, and then basically the game started to get some of its mythical elements back into the core gameplay design, which was great. It is one of those things that like every playtest and every time we put this into somebody's hands, like the first thing we see everybody doing is just throwing the axe constantly, and after hours and hours of doing that, no one seems to be tired of it. So I definitely feel like it's reached that polished level where it's like, okay, it definitely feels like this is Kratos' new axe, this is his new weapon, and it has a different feel than the blades used to have, but it has a feel of its own. Old God of War games have always had like a kind of very fast and fluid combat. So for this game, it's like when you jump in there, it's a little bit slower than previous God of War games, but it's just as fluid and just as brutal as it's ever been. Basically now, the player, we expect him to kind of think about his surroundings a little bit more, think about how Atreus can help him with combat and help him with enemies. We expect you to have a little bit more moment-to-moment decision-making than maybe in the past, just because now you do have to watch your backside a little bit, can't see what's back there, got to depend on the indicators for that, depending on Atreus helping you out with what might be going on back there, and just paying more attention to your surroundings. Games that are like this, that have the close camera, tend to focus on one enemy, and if you have multiple enemies, you tend to have to kind of move around and kind of like gather them up and find some way to handle this, whereas in this game, we still wanted you to feel like if there's a crowd in front of you, you can just kind of mash on and through there and tear them up and not have too much fear. And it took a lot of, of iterations on the tech of the enemies and just the control of the character to really get this into a place where we're like, okay, even though the camera is close and you can't see everything around you, the game somehow still works because you have your son out there that's also distracting enemies and pulling aggro off of you. You have this weapon that you can use to pin down enemy, and you could turn around and not even look at him anymore because he's pinned down in the distance. As well as like just reactions like people are used to when Kratos just launches the enemy in the air and knocks him down or slams him into the wall. We have all these various ways to kind of pin enemies down. So when you do that, even though the threats are behind you, they're not really threats anymore because you kind of incapacitated them. I just can't wait to see get this into players' hands, and because it's been a long development, and we're finally seeing everything come together and come to a close. So the best part is just having other people play it.